Hi, I'm Bill Browning from Terrapin Bright Green, and welcome to a presentation on the impact of biophilic design on student success. Our learning objectives are to first explore neuroscience theories and how that influences design, specific biophilic design strategies applied to a space. Then how did we assess the space in terms of responses, students and teachers? And what's the methodology and how could you replicate this in a project that you might be doing? The presentation is divided into two pieces. The first is on the science of biophilia, and the second is the actual study itself. I want to thank all our sponsors, in particular the American Institute of Architects, for the Upjohn grant, which funded this almost 4-year-long effort. The study team was led by Jim Detterman, an architect in Baltimore, and included Terrapin Bright Green, Morgan State University, and the neuroscience team at the Salk Institute. So we'll start with the science. In many ways, biophilic design is really thinking about what we already intuitively know. Certain spaces are beautiful, and we respond to them quite positively. The term biophilia comes from the Greek words bio, life, and philia, love. The term was coined by the social psychologist Erich Fromm, but really get its working definition from Harvard biologist E.O. Wilson in his 1984 book, Biophilia. One of the earliest pieces of science comes from Roger Ulrich at Texas A&M University, where they're looking at patients recovering from one specific surgery. Half of the patients had a view to a brick wall, and the other half had a view to a clump of trees and shrubs. Not a spectacular landscape, but the outcomes were dramatically different. All of the patients were paired demographically, even the paint color of the room was matched, and what they found was that the patients who had a view to a brick wall took almost 1 day longer to recover than the patients that had the view to the trees and shrubs. Patients with the nature view had fewer nursing calls and took fewer painkillers. And so this helps launch the whole healing gardens movement in hospitals. And it also launches lots of other research. Ulrich went on to do subsequent work where they showed patients, cardiac patients, before and after surgery, a picture of nature or just a blank sheet. And they found that those patients who just saw the picture of nature had lower blood pressure and lower heart rate and better healing times than the patients who just saw the blank sheet. So this does ask the question, is just a picture of nature enough? And so that's the question that Peter Kahn and his team at the University of Washington asked, is simulated or fake nature enough? And so in this experiment, people were given a stressor, and the recovery task was performed either looking at a wall of gray curtains, some of the curtains open with a window out to this view in the campus with the fountain and the flowers and the trees, or in this case, some of the curtains open and a flat screen television of the same dimensions as the window and broadcast live on that flat screen television, the image out the window. Staring at the curtains wasn't particularly helpful, but looking at the real and simulated view were both psychologically beneficial. Looking at the simulated view lowered blood pressure and heart rate, but not as much as the actual view. Peter and his team were not quite sure why, but we suspect that it has to do with the difference between a 2-dimensional image and a 3-dimensional image, which the brain registers differently. One of the questions for a long time has been, so how is the brain operating when we're experiencing nature? And in fact, when we are out in nature or viewing nature, we're sometimes in what's called a state of soft fascination. The brain is expending less energy. Now, about 12 years ago, the neuroscientists started catching up with this. And in fact, we now know that when we are in that state of experiencing nature, the prefrontal cortex does quiet down. And so when we come back and it's time to focus on task, we now have better cognitive capacity. So this is what's called attention restoration theory that was put together by Rachel and Stephen Kaplan at the University of Michigan. The question for quite a while had been, how long does it take for this effect to take hold? And we now know that it only takes 40 seconds of viewing a picture, even just a picture of nature, and we get the prefrontal cortex to quiet down and restored cognitive capacity. We're fascinated by flames dancing in a fireplace, waves on a beach, or the dappled sunlight under trees. We really like things like the fern leaf and snowflakes and that have these repeating patterns. These repeating patterns are mathematical equations called fractals. In this case, these are what are called statistical fractals. So they're not exactly the same shape each time, but they are mathematically repeated, and they occur frequently and infrequently in nature. They occur so frequently in nature that the brain is predisposed to really process these easily. And so when we see them in human designed objects, we see these statistical fractals, it lowers our stress and it's easier for the brain to process it. So the term that gets used to explain this is called fractal fluency. Our brain is fluent with these forms of fractals. Another form of fluency is how we process certain images. When lines are together, going in a similar direction, either curving or straight in biomorphic forms or in linear forms or in radial forms, it's fixed sets of neurons that process that. If I have multiple lines going lots of different directions, then it takes much more effort for the brain to process that image. So when we see these sort of collinear or radial patterns, it's much easier for the brain to process it, and it lowers our stress again. And the brain is always looking for these sorts of patterns. Even if the direct connection, if it's discontinuous pieces, the brain will find these patterns and connect them together, as you see in the curving line on the left, whereas on the right, there's no way to assemble that similar pattern. So the image on the left is easier for the brain to process than the image on the right. So if we take this to the larger and we're thinking about this sort of sense of complexity and order and these patterns that occur within nature and how we use them in human spaces is really intriguing. And it leads to partially our way of understanding the world and navigating in the world. If we pull together all of the various chunks of science, what we find is that they kind of fall into three broad categories. The first we call nature and the space. And these are direct experiences of nature in the built environment. The second are natural analogs, so biomorphic forms, things that are indirect representations of nature, but still connected. And then the final category has to do with the three-dimensional experiences in space and how those impact us psychologically and physiologically. We've codified these into 15 experiential patterns, 7 related to in the nature of the space, 3 are natural analogs, and 5 in the form, the spatial experience. So nature and the space are these direct experiences of nature that we could have in the built environment. So the visual connection to nature, non-visual connection, what the sense, the sounds, the touches, movement that is unpredictable and not exactly repeated each time, dynamic, diffuse light, the movement of light, the changes of color of light, the changes in light intensity. Water elicits incredibly strong response. And then connection and seeing changes in the seasons and things growing and dying and the connection to natural systems. Natural analogs. These are those indirect experiences of nature, but which are also incredibly important. Biomorphic forms and patterns, the use of natural materials like wood and stone, and then this idea of the balance between complexity and order. And then the three-dimensional experiences, prospect and unimpeded view through space, really important for senses of wayfinding, safety, and intrigue. Refuge, where my back is protected and I have a canopy overhead where I can withdraw. And if then I then have a view from that refuge space to prospect, now I have prospect and refuge. Mystery, where I just feel compelled to go explore around that corner. And risk peril, where I get that intriguing burst of excitement, but I'm not really in any danger. And then awe, where we're just overwhelmed and inspired. Experiences of awe are a distinct brain response, and they leave us feeling humbled and charitable, and tend to exhibit much more pro-social behavior after we have an awe experience. So 15 patterns is an awful lot to remember, but one of the most important things is that different patterns support different outcomes. And so this can be used as a tool to figure out which pattern might be most appropriate for a product or a place to support the users of that space. Is it stress reduction that's most important? Is it improved cognitive performance? Is it mood and preference? Some patterns support multiple outcomes, some support only one. So the Green Street Academy study. Our objective really was to see, could biophilic design interventions change the experience for the students? Could it improve academic performance? Could it lower their stress? We were looking at several patterns in particular. One was visual connection to nature. Another was dynamic and diffuse light. A third was biomorphic forms and patterns. Now, a number of these have strong science on them, but there are others where there are some gaps. And we hope that maybe, potentially, this study could also help fill in some of those gaps. So this is the Green Street Academy. The building was originally built in 1925 as a Baltimore public school. In 2015, it was renovated and turned into a STEM charter school for Baltimore. Many of the classrooms are facing east, which unfortunately means that while they have great daylight, they have a lot of glare in the morning. And so they have Venetian blinds, which unfortunately the teachers tend to just close and never open. And so even though there may be a view to the outside, the students aren't experiencing that. And so this is a 7th grade mathematics classroom. And this is a 6th grade mathematics classroom. And this is actually the room that we used for the experiment. As you'll see, there's a lot of posters put on the wall with educational content on those posters. So here are those classrooms. Here's the experimental classroom. You'll see a combination of some of the blinds open, some blinds closed, and you'll notice all the material on the walls. So the interventions were fairly simple. We wanted interventions that were low cost and things that almost anyone could do. So the interventions were carpet tile, a wallpaper freeze, removing most all of those posters from the wall. What a neuroscientist said, having all of that information posted all the time up on the walls is actually really distracting and makes it harder for the students to focus. Patterned shades on the windows, a waveform acoustic tile ceiling, and enhanced landscaping outside. So this is a rendering of the classroom, and you can see the carpet tile, the wallpaper freeze, the blinds, the waveform ceiling tiles, and you can see the garden outside. So here are those components. The first is using a biomorphic and collinear pattern. This is an interface carpet tile called prairie grass. Then also using biomorphic and collinear patterns in the wallpaper freeze around the top of the classroom. This was designed by folks at Design Techs in partnership with the neuroscientists at Salk. And then here are the window shades. These are Mecco shades, and they are a fabric shade, and then silk screened on the shades are the shadow patterns of tree branches. So this forms a statistical fractal on the window. Here's the garden. There was an existing garden outside, and landscape firm with students involved enhanced and expanded that garden. So one of the ways that we wanted to measure, we did 4 months of biometric testing, and we were looking particularly at stress recovery. And so that was number 3. Number 1, we did student and instructor interviews. We also surveyed the students, and then we also measured learning outcomes. In the interviews with students, which were also, some of them were videotaped, one of the words that came through most commonly is the students felt more focused, and the word calm came up a number of times in that space. For the teacher in particular, teacher noticed that the students behave differently in the classroom. She said that they came into the classroom and they calmed down faster and got more focused quicker than they had before. And we also wanted to look at stress. And so in the survey work that was done at the beginning of the school year and the end of the school year, you'll see that the students recorded an improvement in stress level over the course of the school year, but we see that the stress level in the biophilic classroom is significantly lower than it is in the control classroom. We also looked at perception of the space. Did they like the space? How did they like their math lessons? And what was their level of engagement and involvement? And we see in all cases, the biophilic classroom came through better than the control classroom. For biometric testing, we did 4 months of testing in the control classroom and in the experimental classroom. 19 students in each of those classrooms tested in one class period at the same time, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday of each week. at the beginning of class and at the end of class. And we're measuring heart rate variability, which, unlike blood pressure and heart rate, you actually want a higher number, because the higher level of variability between each heartbeat is a better indication of stress recovery and relaxation. And what we found from the beginning of class to end of class was a significant improvement in the biophilic classroom, significantly higher than the change that we see in the control classroom. Now you see this improvement increases over the course of the school year, and you see this spike in April. The spike in April is likely due to after February and March, with no trees and leaves on those plants. In April, the trees flower in the garden and the trees will leaf out. And so suddenly you have this burst of flowers in green, which the teacher attributes to that spike. The city of Baltimore uses the iReady test as an academic assessment test. It's given multiple times throughout the school system over the course of the school year. In this case, our control is the same classroom, but in the year before, with the same teacher teaching the same curriculum. So in the prior year, there are 122 students who use that classroom. In the experimental year, there are 125 students who use the classroom. What we see, and what we would hope to see, is at the beginning of the year, the test scores are the same from both years. But then over the course of the school year, we see a dramatic improvement in test scores in the biophilic classroom, a significantly higher gain than we saw in prior years in that classroom. So these are great results. And what's exciting about it is that these were minimal interventions trying to go for the lowest cost possible. They led to people liking the space much more, and significant improvement in stress outcomes, and a significant academic improvement as well. This fits within a broader context of other studies of biophilia and academic performance relating to physiological health, cognitive performance, and mood and preference. And another academic example is the work of our friend Oliver Heath at the Garden School in Hackney, UK. This is a break space for children on the autism spectrum. And it's adjoining a playground. While the playground has a lot of nature experiences in it, it's overstimulating frequently for the autistic children. And so this is a space for them to retreat into. It uses biomorphic forms. It uses natural materials, uses a view to nature. It creates a refuge space, all of which are incredibly engaging for the students. And we hear very successful. So why is all this important? Well, if we know that students can study better and achieve better test scores and all of that, their long-term economic opportunities are greatly improved. And so improving classrooms, even at the youngest level, has long-term beneficial impact for students and society. So thank you for your time. If you want to read more about this, you can download the entire report from the Terrapin Bright Green website. If you have additional questions, you can contact us at these places. And thank you so much for your time.